There's a moment that comes quietly, not with drama, not with loss, but with an emptiness that feels like revelation. You open your phone and realize no one has texted in days. The chat bubbles that once buzzed with plans are still. Your weekends have become slow, unplanned, silent. And that silence at first feels like failure. It feels like the world has moved on without you. You start to question yourself. Was I too distant, too honest, too strange? You wonder what changed until you realize the truth. You did. You began to listen less to noise and more to conscience. You stopped laughing at jokes that didn't align with your heart. You started saying no. And suddenly, the people who thrived on your compliance disappeared. What you lost wasn't friendship, it was illusion. The world celebrates connection, it worships crowds, it teaches you that popularity equals worth and solitude equals failure. But the Stoics, the ancient philosophers who mastered the art of inner peace, taught the opposite. They believed that solitude isn't what happens when people leave. It's what happens when truth arrives. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who ruled the known world, once wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful than your own soul." He understood something we're only now beginning to remember, that your greatest company is the voice that speaks when all others fall silent. Seneca reminded his students that crowds weaken judgment, that the person who constantly seeks company soon forgets who they are. And Epictetus, once a slave, found freedom not in friendship or fame, but in mastering his own reactions. "You are not disturbed by things," he wrote, "but by the view you take of them." When you learn to sit with yourself, solitude stops being a cage. It becomes a classroom, because in silence, you start to see what connection had hidden. You begin to notice how many of your friendships were built not on truth, but on convenience. How many people loved the version of you that made them comfortable, not the one that made you whole. And as that realization sinks in, your circle begins to shrink. But what remains is pure. Because when you raise your standards, the universe responds by filtering out what doesn't align. The Stoics believed that solitude was the natural consequence of self-knowledge. When you begin to know yourself, you stop needing the constant validation of others. When you begin to value truth, you stop entertaining the comfort of lies. When you begin to honor peace, you start losing people who feed on chaos. That's not loneliness, that's liberation. The lack of friends doesn't mean you've failed. It means you've begun to live with honesty. It means you've started choosing your company the same way you choose your thoughts, carefully, intentionally, sparingly. Because not everyone deserves access to your mind. Not everyone deserves entry into your peace. So today, we'll explore what that really means through 7 Stoic insights and 7 human stories that reflect them. Each one reveals something essential about the quiet path you've chosen, the path that leads away from noise and toward truth, the path where peace is louder than approval, the path where solitude becomes strength. Insight 1. You have high standards for character. When your circle shrinks, the first thing people notice is your absence. They think you've withdrawn. They think you've become cold. What they don't see is that you've stopped confusing connection with compromise. Because real character has gravity, and gravity pulls away what can't hold its weight. The story of Noah, the engineer who refused to bend. Noah's office overlooked the skyline, glass, metal, light. He used to think that view meant he'd made it. But success has its own kind of corruption, one that whispers instead of shouts. He worked for a multinational construction firm responsible for public infrastructure, bridges, tunnels, highways. It was the kind of work that built cities, but it was also the kind that tested souls. He found the flaw on a Thursday afternoon, a single number, off by just enough to matter, a safety cost listed as optional. He printed the report, walked to his manager's desk, and asked if it was a mistake. The man didn't even look up. "Don't worry about it, Noah. That's above your pay grade." The words echoed. Above your pay grade, meaning below your conscience. That night, Noah didn't go home. He stayed in the office long after the lights dimmed, rereading the report, knowing exactly what it meant. Cutting that corner would save millions, but one day it would cost lives. By morning, he'd made his decision. He sent the report directly to the auditors. By noon, his email access was gone. By Friday, his desk was cleared. He thought his colleagues would support him, the ones who'd called him the most honest guy on the team. But honesty is easy to admire and hard to stand beside. Within weeks, they stopped answering his calls. At happy hour, his name became a warning. He spent the next year working contract jobs, struggling to pay rent, and wondering if virtue was worth the price. Until one morning, the news broke. The company under investigation, executives arrested. And suddenly, everyone remembered Noah's name again. But he didn't gloat. He simply smiled, made coffee, and opened a new set of blueprints, this time for a project of his own. Because integrity, he'd learned, might leave you alone, but it never leaves you empty. Stoic reflection. Marcus Aurelius said, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Your actions stain you. Every compromise leaves a mark, and every act of integrity keeps you clean." Having fewer friends often means your soul refuses to be dyed in dishonest shades. It means you'd rather be misunderstood than corrupted. You've stopped calling compliance kindness, and you've stopped apologizing for conscience. People may say you've changed, but what they really mean is you've stopped pretending. And that, according to the Stoics, is the beginning of wisdom. Insight 2. You're comfortable with your own company. There's a kind of quiet most people can't bear. It arrives when the chatter ends, when the weekend plans fall through, and there's nothing left to distract you from yourself. For most, that silence feels suffocating, but for you, it has become sacred. Because when you stopped needing company to feel complete, you crossed a threshold the world rarely dares to enter. You learned that being alone isn't the same as being lonely. It's being free. The story of Julia, the runner who stopped running from herself. Julia used to live in motion. If there was a dinner, she went. If there was a party, she stayed until closing. Her life was a blur of playlists and city lights, a race she never quite understood the rules of. Then the breakup happened. 6 years of shared schedules, shared dreams, gone. She moved into a small apartment on the edge of town. 1 bedroom, 1 mirror, too much time. The silence hit like cold air. At first, she tried to outrun it. She joined new clubs, downloaded new apps, filled every hour with faces and voices. But late at night, when the door clicked shut, the quiet was still there, a shadow that refused to leave. One morning, she woke before dawn and went for a run. No music, no pace tracker, just footsteps on wet pavement. The city was asleep. The air tasted clean. And for the first time in months, her thoughts stopped chasing each other. She started running every day, not away from pain, but toward presence. At first she noticed the sunrise, then the rhythm of her breath, then, slowly, herself. She began to paint again, something she hadn't done since college. She filled her walls with color, her fridge with vegetables, her mornings with stillness. Her friends worried. "You're isolating," they said. She smiled. "No," she replied. "I'm returning." Months later, she sat on her balcony watching the sunset bleed into the horizon. The same silence that once felt heavy now felt holy. It no longer demanded escape. It offered peace, Stoic reflection. Epictetus wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Freedom isn't found in travel, applause, or company. It's found in the mind that no longer fears its own echo. When you become comfortable with solitude, the world loses its leverage over you. You no longer chase invitations to prove you matter. You no longer need witnesses to feel alive. You've discovered that your thoughts, when faced with patience, become allies instead of enemies. That's what the Stoics practiced daily, sitting with their minds until noise became wisdom. They believed solitude is the gym of the soul. And every time you choose stillness over distraction, you strengthen a muscle most people never discover: the ability to be whole, even when you're alone. So if your phone stays silent and your evenings stretch long, don't rush to fill them. Listen. Because in that quiet, you may finally hear the person you were always meant to meet: yourself. Insight 3. You understand the true cost of relationships. The more you grow, the more you realize that connection, like currency, requires energy, and not everyone spends it wisely. Most people scatter their attention: a text here, a favor there, endless small talk that fills the day but empties the heart. You've stopped doing that. You've learned that friendship, like investment, must yield meaning, not just noise. The story of Daniel, the nurse who learned emotional budgeting. Daniel worked nights in the trauma ward. He was the kind of nurse families remembered: gentle, unhurried, endlessly patient. He held the hands of strangers as they died and comforted parents whose worlds had collapsed. But outside the hospital, he couldn't stop caring. His phone was a revolving door of emergencies: friends venting, co-workers complaining, relatives demanding help. He never said no. He told himself compassion was duty. But compassion, unchecked, becomes consumption. One winter, after a 14-hour shift, Daniel drove home exhausted. His apartment was dark, the fridge empty. His phone buzzed again, another crisis that wasn't his. He sat on the floor and cried quietly, ashamed of his own depletion. He could heal others, but not himself. The next morning, he wrote a list of everyone he cared about. Beside each name, he wrote a single question: does this connection give as much as it takes? The answers hurt. He began to set boundaries. He let unanswered messages stay unanswered. He took long walks without his phone, learned guitar, reconnected with his sister he'd neglected for years. The world didn't collapse. In fact, it became smaller, simpler, kinder. 6 months later, his circle was half its size, but every person left in it mattered. He was no longer tired of people. He was nourished by them. Stoic reflection. Seneca wrote, "Associate with those who will make a better man of you. Not more people, better ones." The Stoics believed that every friendship should be mutual elevation, each person a mirror reflecting virtue back to the other. You've realized that relationships, like architecture, require maintenance. Too many structures, and the foundation cracks. So you invest where it counts. Having fewer friends doesn't mean you've grown cold. It means you've grown wise enough to know that time, energy, and empathy are finite resources, and you will no longer spend them on what yields no return. That realization, though painful, is liberation disguised as loss. Because once you master emotional budgeting, you stop confusing exhaustion with love. And the relationships that remain become sanctuaries instead of obligations. Insight 4. You value authenticity over social performance. There's a strange fatigue that follows every performance. You know the one. The smile that doesn't quite reach your eyes. The small talk that feels rehearsed. The laughter that echoes hollow once you're alone. For a long time, you played along. Everyone does. You thought that being agreeable meant being accepted. But over time, you began to feel the cost. The mask grew heavier than the silence that waited behind it. And so you stopped performing. When you chose authenticity over appearance, your audience thinned, but your peace deepened. The story of Amir, the teacher who stopped pretending. Amir had been teaching English literature for nearly a decade. His colleagues adored him, his students respected him, and his principal called him the heart of the department. But beneath the compliments was exhaustion. Every Friday, the faculty gathered for team-building nights, loud bars, louder laughter. Amir went because he was supposed to. He laughed at jokes he didn't find funny, smiled through gossip that made him uneasy. One evening, as neon lights flickered off the bar's mirror, he caught his own reflection, a face stretched into a smile that wasn't his. Something broke quietly inside him. The next week, he declined the invitation. The week after, another. At first, the messages kept coming. "Come on, Amir, don't vanish on us." Then they stopped. In the empty spaces, Amir found something else. He began hosting small gatherings in his classroom after school. No alcohol, no gossip, just books, music, and conversation. 2 students stayed late each Friday, then 4, then 8. They discussed Dostoevsky, courage, meaning, no filters, no pretense. Months later, the principal walked past his room and saw a circle of students laughing softly, their desks filled with half-finished poems. He smiled. "You've started something new, Amir." Amir nodded. "No," he said, "I just stopped pretending." The faculty bar crowd eventually forgot him, but those students, the quiet ones, still wrote to him years later, saying his honesty changed their lives. Stoic reflection. Seneca once wrote, "He who is everywhere is nowhere." The more you spread yourself across roles and masks, the less of you remains. Authenticity requires courage, not the courage to impress, but the courage to be seen as you are. When you strip away performance, you lose the audience, but you gain the truth. You stop measuring your worth by how loudly the world claps. You begin to find meaning in the silence between your own thoughts. The Stoics believed that pretending is the surest way to fracture the soul. To live according to nature, Marcus Aurelius said, is to live according to your own design. That means showing up as yourself, even if fewer people understand you. So when your circle shrinks because you no longer perform, remember this: they left the role, not the person. The ones who stay, they're the audience that never needed a show. Insight 5. You prioritize inner peace over social drama. Peace has a sound. It's the absence of urgency, the still hum beneath a quiet morning. Once you've heard it, chaos becomes unbearable. That's why you no longer crave drama. You used to mistake excitement for connection. You mistook conflict for passion. But one day, you realized the cost of constant noise, how much energy it stole from the calm you were finally beginning to build. The story of Melissa, the friend who let the group chat go silent. Melissa's phone used to light up every minute. Her university group chat was endless. Hundreds of messages a day, memes, gossip, inside jokes. At first, it felt like belonging, but the older she grew, the more the chat turned sharp. Sarcasm disguised as humor, envy veiled as concern. She noticed how drained she felt after reading the messages, how she began rehearsing responses that matched the group's tone instead of her own truth. One Sunday morning, after another flurry of gossip, She placed her phone face down and whispered, "Enough." She muted the chat. She didn't announce it. She didn't explain. She just stepped back. At first, she felt anxious, as if she'd disappear without the noise. But days passed. The anxiety faded. The silence remained. She began spending weekends outdoors. No notifications, just the steady rhythm of her breath against the wind. She noticed the texture of things again, the way light filtered through trees, the weight of her thoughts slowing into stillness. 2 weeks later, one of her friends messaged privately, "You okay? You've been quiet." Melissa smiled. "I'm better than okay," she typed. "I'm quiet on purpose." Months later, she left the group altogether. Her circle shrank from dozens to 3, but those 3 never required her to shrink herself. Her peace, once fragile, became unbreakable. Stoic reflection. Epictetus taught, you have power over your mind, not outside events. You can't stop others from gossiping, judging, or misunderstanding, but you can choose what enters your mind. You can choose not to participate. Most people guard their houses more than their thoughts. You've reversed that. You lock the door to your mind and open the window to silence. The Stoics called this ataraxia, tranquility of soul. It's not the absence of difficulty, but the absence of disturbance. When you stop feeding on drama, you stop starving your spirit. Peace becomes your baseline, not your reward. And the fewer people who thrive in that stillness with you, the more sacred it becomes. Insight 6. You don't need external validation. You used to crave applause. You didn't call it that. You called it feedback, support, affirmation. But what you really wanted was proof that you mattered. Every compliment felt like sunlight. Every silence felt like winter. But one day, you stopped needing weather reports to feel alive. That day changed everything. The story of Leo, the musician who quit the stage. For years, Leo played guitar in smoky bars, chasing the same high, the rush of lights, the applause, the fleeting roar of a crowd that barely remembered his name. He told himself it was passion, but deep down it was hunger, not for music, but for approval. The turning point came on a Saturday night. Halfway through his set, the string on his guitar snapped. The crowd booed. He froze, humiliation pulsing through his veins like fire. He finished the song with trembling hands, forced a smile, and left the stage. Backstage, someone patted him on the back. "Tough crowd, huh?" Leo just nodded, but something inside him was breaking. He'd given everything, his time, his sleep, his soul, to an audience that evaporated the moment the lights dimmed. That night, he went home and didn't touch the guitar for weeks. He sat in silence and realized he had never actually played for himself. He had been performing his worth instead of expressing it. Months later, he picked up the instrument again, not for applause, but for honesty. He began recording small acoustic pieces, raw and imperfect, in his apartment. He uploaded one to a forgotten corner of the internet. No hashtags, no marketing, no expectations. A month later, a message appeared from a woman in Norway. "I listened to your song while my father was dying. Thank you for helping me breathe." That single message meant more than all the applause he'd ever received, because it was born of truth, not noise. Leo learned that external validation is a loan with cruel interest. You owe more every time you collect it. But self-respect, once earned, compounds quietly. He still plays, not for crowds, but for peace. Stoic reflection. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own. When you stop chasing praise, you stop renting your happiness to strangers. You become your own witness. External validation is applause for the mask, not the person. It fades the moment the performance ends. But inner validation, the quiet pride of living by your own values, endures even in solitude. Having few friends often means you've stopped measuring yourself by the mirrors others hold. You've realized that no compliment can substitute for character, and no rejection can diminish it. The Stoics saw this as true freedom, autarkia, self-sufficiency of the soul. When your peace no longer depends on approval, no one can take it away. Insight 7. You recognize that quality always trumps quantity. Eventually, you stop counting people and start measuring depth. You realize that one honest conversation can heal more than 100 polite ones. That one loyal friend is worth more than 1,000 companions who vanish when silence begins. This is the final revelation of solitude, the understanding that quality is not just better than quantity. It's the only thing that ever mattered. The story of Sophia, the engineer who built fewer bridges. Sophia worked in tech, a world obsessed with networking. Every week brought another event, another rooftop mixer, another opportunity to exchange business cards with people who would never speak again. Her calendar was full. Her soul was empty. One Friday, her company hosted a connectathon, 8 hours of team games and forced laughter. Sophia smiled, but inside she felt like a ghost floating through conversation. On the train ride home, she looked out the window and realized she couldn't name one person who truly knew her. Not what she did, but who she was. The next morning, she packed a small bag and drove to the mountains. No signal, no noise, just cold air and stillness. At a small roadside inn, she met Matteo, an old craftsman who built wooden bridges by hand. She watched him plane a beam with patient precision. "You could build 10 of these with machines," she said. He smiled. "Fast bridges fall first. Strong ones take time." That sentence stayed with her. When she returned to the city, she began pruning her life with the same principle. She stopped saying yes to everything. She stopped treating acquaintances like obligations. She began nurturing 3 relationships: her sister, a mentor, and a close friend she'd neglected. Each required time, care, honesty. Each gave her something real in return: support that didn't vanish in difficulty, laughter that didn't need an audience. Years later, when Sophia launched her own company, it wasn't her network that helped her succeed. It was those 3 people, the ones who had walked beside her in silence. The rest of the world had faded, but the bridges she'd built remained. Stoic reflection. Seneca wrote, "It is quality rather than quantity that matters." He wasn't speaking of possessions, he was speaking of souls. You've learned that friendship obeys the same law. Depth endures, breadth dilutes, and when you choose depth, the crowd thins, but the connection intensifies. The Stoics called this sympathia, the bond of genuine kinship between virtuous souls. It can't be rushed, and it can't be multiplied. It's forged in honesty, tested by time, and proven in silence. So yes, your circle is small, but it's strong enough to carry weight, and strength, not size, defines all things that last. Conclusion: the Stoic gift of solitude. You've walked a long road to arrive here, through loss, silence, and self-discovery. At first, the path looked empty. Now you can see it was never empty at all. It was simply yours. The world still rushes by in noise. People chasing each other's attention, trading authenticity for applause, mistaking motion for meaning. But you've begun to understand what the Stoics always knew, that peace doesn't come from company. It comes from clarity. It comes from walking in alignment with your own soul, even when no one walks beside you. You've learned that high standards filter. That integrity has a gravity of its own, pulling away everything that cannot match its weight. You've learned that being comfortable with your own company is not withdrawal, but mastery, that the mind which can rest within itself is stronger than any crowd. You've learned that relationships are investments, and wisdom is knowing where to spend your care. You've learned that authenticity shrinks the audience but amplifies the truth. You've learned that peace is precious, too precious to trade for drama. You've learned that validation is a mirage, that worth cannot be borrowed from other people's praise. And you've learned that quality, in friendships, in choices, in life itself, is the only form of abundance that never decays. Each lesson came with loss. Each loss came with light. That is the paradox of solitude. Every door that closes opens inward. The Stoics never feared that inward turn. Marcus Aurelius, alone in his tent while the empire slept, wrote words to keep his own heart steady. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. He understood that virtue is practiced in solitude long before it's witnessed in public. Seneca wrote his letters to a single friend, not to impress the masses, but to preserve the exchange of honest thought in a dishonest world. And Epictetus, born a slave, reminded his students that freedom begins not in chains broken, but in desires mastered. All three knew the truth you are now living, that solitude is not a void, it's a vessel. It carries the rarest cargo, self-knowledge, calm, and unshakable dignity. When you sit alone now, the silence feels different. It no longer accuses you, it affirms you. It tells you that you've reached a stage most never find, the stage where you no longer chase being understood, because you understand yourself. You look back at the people who once filled your days, the noise, the laughter, the endless motion, and you see them with compassion, not resentment. They were part of your becoming. They taught you contrast, what peace isn't, what connection isn't, what love isn't. And through that contrast, you learned what remains. Now you live deliberately, you wake slowly, you breathe before responding. You speak when words add weight. You give, but never at the expense of your own center. You protect your energy the way the ancients protected fire, as something sacred, fragile, and essential. You are no longer afraid of being misunderstood. You are no longer afraid of being unseen, because the people meant to find you will recognize you in silence, not in spectacle. The Stoics believed that the wise person carries their homeland within them. That means wherever you stand, crowded room or empty room, you are home. No one can exile you from yourself. So the next time the room grows quiet, don't reach for distraction. Let the quiet speak. Let it remind you that solitude isn't loneliness, it's alignment. It's the moment your soul stops shouting to be heard, because you've finally begun listening. Look around. You may have fewer friends, but the ones who remain are true. You may have fewer conversations, but each word means more. You may have fewer plans, but each moment feels real. And you, the person you've become, are stronger, steadier, and more peaceful than you've ever been. The lack of friends doesn't mean your life has emptied. It means it has distilled. It means that what remains is pure. A life lived on purpose, with virtue as compass and peace as proof. Remember this. The goal was never to collect people. It was to cultivate presence. The goal was never to be surrounded. It was to be centered. So walk quietly, but walk proudly. For you have become what the Stoics revered: self-contained, self-guided, serene. And that kind of strength never needs witnesses. If this message found you in silence, let it remind you: the silence was never your enemy. It was your teacher, and now it has made you whole. Epilogue: the circle that remains. Before you close this chapter, take a moment to think of the few who stayed. The quiet friend who checks on you without asking for anything. The mentor who speaks to your potential, not your performance. The person who sits beside you in silence and somehow says everything that needs to be said. These are your equals in spirit, your sympathia, as the Stoics called it, the natural kinship between souls seeking virtue. Nurture them gently. They are proof that solitude doesn't end connection, it purifies it. One day you'll meet someone new, maybe at a bookstore, a park, a moment of chance. They'll speak softly, listen fully, and you'll feel something familiar: stillness. You'll recognize it immediately, because you now speak the same quiet language, the language of those who have made peace with themselves. And together, you'll walk not in need, but in understanding, not in noise, but in resonance, not in crowd, but in calm. That's the true reward of this journey: not isolation, but authenticity, not loneliness, but loyalty, not emptiness, but essence. The lack of friends was never a curse. It was the call to refinement. It was life whispering: build fewer bridges, but build them stronger. So keep walking, keep listening, keep choosing peace over performance and virtue over validation. Because the world will always chase the crowd. But the wise, the truly free, walk alone until they meet another walking the same way. And when they do, it feels nothing like loneliness. It feels like home. Extended reflection: when solitude becomes strength. There's a strange point on every journey when you realize that solitude no longer hurts. It doesn't echo, it hums. At first, you tried to fill it with company, conversation, distractions. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. You stopped fearing the empty spaces, and they began to fill themselves with meaning. Now the silence between your breaths feels like a teacher. It asks you nothing, yet answers everything. It reminds you that peace isn't found at the end of noise. It's found beneath it, waiting for you to quiet down long enough to notice. This is what the Stoics trained for every day. Not perfection, not performance, but presence. To sit still and feel the truth beneath appearances. To stand firm while the world trembles around you. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "Men seek retreats for themselves, in the country, by the sea, in the mountains. But you can find retreat in your own mind whenever you wish. That's what you've built, a retreat inside yourself. A place the world cannot reach, not its judgments, not its noise, not its constant pressure to become someone else. You used to look for peace outside, in other people, in recognition, in movement. Now you carry it like a secret flame. It doesn't depend on who stays or leaves. It burns because you've learned how to tend it. You've discovered what the ancients called eudaimonia, a life aligned with virtue, where happiness is not pleasure but purpose. A life where doing the right thing, even in isolation, is reward enough. People may never understand it. They might see your quiet as distance, your boundaries as arrogance, your calm as coldness. But that misunderstanding no longer disturbs you, because you've replaced the need to be seen with the desire to see clearly. Every time you choose calm over conflict, restraint over reaction, solitude over superficiality, you move closer to wisdom. And that's the quiet truth of this path. The more you master your emotions, the less control others have over you. The more you value peace, the less chaos finds you. The more you know yourself, the less you need to prove anything at all. This is the kind of strength that doesn't roar. It whispers. It doesn't demand respect. It earns it through composure. That's what solitude was preparing you for all along. To stand unshaken in a shaking world. To remain kind in an unkind one. To remain calm in a loud one. That is not loneliness. That is mastery. You've learned to become your own companion, your own guide, your own quiet authority. And from that stillness, life looks different now, softer, slower, but infinitely clearer. You begin to see others through that same calm lens. You no longer chase, because what is meant for you never requires running. You no longer beg to be understood, because truth doesn't depend on recognition. You no longer seek the crowd, because wisdom moves quietly, unseen, among the few who can hear it. If you ever doubt this path, if the silence ever feels too wide, too empty, remember this. Even Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, wrote his deepest thoughts to himself. Not to impress, not to publish, but to stay anchored in a world built on illusion. His solitude shaped history. Yours can shape a soul. So breathe. Let the noise fade. Let the world rush past you. You're not behind. You're ahead, just on a different road. Closing. The fire within the quiet. When the ancient Stoics spoke of the sage, they weren't describing someone flawless. They were describing someone steady, someone who could stand alone in a storm and remain composed, not because the world was kind, but because they had learned to be. You are becoming that. Every time you choose peace over noise, integrity over approval, solitude over compromise, you take one step closer to that timeless strength. But strength isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It's the way you rise calmly when the world expects you to react. It's the way you smile softly when others complain. It's the way you refuse to let bitterness steal your compassion. There's beauty in that restraint, a quiet, disciplined grace that few notice, but everyone feels. It's what Marcus Aurelius meant when he said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." He knew that peace is the ultimate defiance. So when you walk alone now, remember, you are not empty. You are becoming whole. You are learning the art of the unshaken soul, the mind that moves through chaos like a flame through wind, flickering, but never extinguished. You have seen what others avoid. That solitude isn't a void, but a mirror. It shows you everything the crowd hides, your fears, your hopes, your strength. And once you've seen yourself clearly, no crowd can define you again. From this point on, life becomes simpler. You'll speak less, but mean more. You'll expect less, but appreciate more. You'll love fewer people, but deeper. You'll live quieter, but freer. The Stoics didn't pursue happiness as an emotion. They pursued harmony, the alignment between thought, word, and action. That alignment is peace, and peace is what you've been building, slowly, quietly, faithfully, with every moment of chosen solitude. So as you end this film, take one last deep breath. Feel the calm behind your ribs, the stillness that used to scare you, now steady as a heartbeat. That's the sound of freedom. That's the proof of growth. You are no longer who you were when this began. You have shed the noise, the need, the falsehoods that once disguised themselves as friendship. You've returned to the truth, to yourself. And though your circle may be smaller now, your world has never been wider. Because a clear mind sees infinite horizons, a steady heart carries endless strength, and a soul at peace needs no company to know it is complete. So walk on, not lonely but luminous, not empty but eternal. For you have found what the Stoics found long ago, that the rarest kind of companionship is the one you find within. Let the silence stay. It belongs to you now. Final closing. The quiet crown. There is a certain peace that only the unaccompanied ever find. It isn't loud, it isn't celebrated, but it's real. It's the moment you wake before sunrise and realize you don't need anyone's permission to feel whole. It's the stillness in your chest after a long day, when you no longer need to explain yourself to anyone. It's the calm that follows every act of integrity. That quiet whisper that says, "You did the right thing." This peace is your crown. It doesn't sparkle, but it shines. It's not made of gold, but of understanding. Understanding that friendship, love, validation, all of them mean nothing if they cost you yourself. You wear that crown now, not to be seen, but to be steady. You've earned it through every lonely night you didn't fill with noise, through every silence you didn't run from, through every decision that kept your soul intact, while others chose convenience. And the truth is, the people who left were never enemies. They were teachers. They taught you how to value honesty, how to guard your energy, how to cherish the few who truly care. They led you back to yourself. That's what this whole path has been about. Not escaping the world, but mastering your place in it. Not rejecting connection, but refining it until only truth remains. So now, when you look around and see fewer faces, remember what that means. It means your life is lighter. It means your boundaries are working. It means the noise has cleared enough for you to finally hear what matters. And if ever the loneliness returns, if the nights stretch too long or the silence feels sharp, look up. The same stars that guided Marcus Aurelius across battlefields still hang above you. They shine for the quiet ones, the thinkers, the seekers, the souls who walk alone not because they must, but because they choose to move in truth. Let that remind you, you are not small. You are part of something vast, a lineage of calm minds and brave hearts who learned that solitude is the forge of greatness. So take one last breath, hold it. Feel the weight of everything you've let go, the noise, the masks, the need. And as you exhale, feel the freedom that remains. That freedom is your proof. That silence is your teacher. That calm is your victory. Walk with it, live with it, and remember, the lack of friends never meant you were alone. It meant you were becoming unshakable.